Thank you, everybody, for coming to our talk. We are going to be discussing the project Lingua Vitae that we've been working on. And this is a narrative game that is designed to teach Latin to college students. So, really quick, we're going to give our introductions here. I'm Brian Beams. I'm the director of the Imaginarium XR Lab at Santa Clara University. And at that lab is where we develop VR applications for curriculum, and we teach immersive design in that classroom as well. So students are able to learn all about virtual and augmented reality development. Part of my work at SEU has been teaching VR game design with an emphasis on sustainability, and I've also been leading the development side of this project.
My name's Lissa Crofton Sleigh, and I am a lecturer in classics. So we're talking Greek, Latin, and ancient history at Santa Clara University. I've been teaching for over 10 years at the college level, and I'm interested in my research and in teaching about sensory experience. So we're talking about both visual and auditory, whether that's talking about architecture or through language pedagogy. So clearly my interests were very piqued with this project.
And I'm Christina Ri. I have a research interest in assessing effectiveness of digital media, especially with the immersiveness. I have conducted functional MRI research in that mode, and I've noticed the subject's brain activity showing more motivated to learn with the immersive media back in 2008. So that got me really interested in looking at further study and collaborating with this team. My background is in digital film and digital storytelling and interactive user experience design. And I'm currently at SCU teaching and also doing learning experience design as well.
And I cannot stress enough how much these student assistants have assisted with this project. Mohammed Kadere has been working as a narrative design and programmer. Isabel Wu has been working on 3D art and modeling. Additional programs have been Vicky Lim and Danny Demeter. And Alexis has helped a lot with the research that is done before conducting our user study and all of the extra work that we've done in terms of contextualizing this project.
So I'm going to talk a little bit about the background of the project. What we really want to do is investigate how we can use virtual reality technology in the humanities and in language acquisition in particular. And what we're really doing here is trying to create a virtual reality supplement to one of the most well-known Latin textbooks in Wheelock's Latin. And the goal is to enrich the teaching and the learning from that book with more modern and innovative learning strategies and tools through narrative, immersive learning, and educational gaming. And the reason that I even started to conceive of this project is because I teach languages which many people consider to be dead languages. Greek and Latin have long had that reputation. And unfortunately, the ways that we teach these languages don't always help that reputation because the textbooks often emphasize memorization of vocabulary and grammar, a lot of reading and writing, but not necessarily creative writing and not a lot of speaking it either. And being in Silicon Valley, we are exposed to all kinds of technology. And I've gone to lots of workshops where I've noticed that, especially for virtual reality, there are very few humanities-based projects. And it seemed like there was a gap there that we wanted to try to fill with this project, with the hope that, not only educators, but developers will see the uses of humanities in virtual reality. What we're noticing now, not only in the technological world, but in Greek and Latin, is that there is this shift to include more communication and more cultural components. What we're trying to do here is put the students in the world themselves so that they can actually interact in the ancient language in order to see the dead languages as alive, and they can connect more with the humans of the past that way. And adding the visual cultural context, so they see the architecture, they see the surrounding society, just makes the ancient world that much more familiar and that much more approachable and relatable to the students. And this is important for us in general in the humanities, because really the goal of the humanities is to understand how we have evolved as a species, and understanding what people did in the past can help us to figure out what we're doing in the present and what we decide to do in the future as well.
There are a number of recent studies that show the effectiveness of immersive environments leading to increase in students' motivation to learn. In 2015, Perry's research indicated that immersive environments can possibly increase motivation to learn language through its gamification. Another interesting study by Kuto in 2018 showed that engagement with language in virtual setting enables exploration or experimentation, which can lead to a decrease in anxiety. When teaching an Asian language such as Latin, as Lisa mentioned before, the distance between now and the culture we study can possibly produce that type of anxiety and disinterest. So these type of findings are especially very meaningful for us. As educators, we're very interested in looking for those indicators and ways to expel that fear and anxiety. And our goal is to ignite students' minds with engaging learning activities. In addition to these studies, there are a number of XR projects that are being developed in a higher ed space, many of them with a focus on motivating audience to take certain actions. And what makes us really excited about this particular project is that it allows students to be part of story living experience and have a conversation and embark that journey of discovery in an active learning mode. With the current pandemic with COVID-19, maybe this can be one of the best alternatives and closest experience to actually visiting those locations in person to learn the language and culture in an immersive and engaging way.
Thanks, Christina. So I'm going to talk a little bit about the storyline for this project. I started to develop this story, but really it's been a collaborative process between me and Brian and the students at the Imaginarium, our assistants. But I wanted a story that can enable the user to interact with daily characters in kind of a very daily life situation. So you have the character Titus, he's in the middle there in your picture. He's a young poet who lives in Rome, and he's not very wealthy, and he's looking for a way to make money. And one of the ways that you could make money in ancient Rome as a writer was through having a patron who could support you and commission you to do various stories. So Titus decides he's going to go to a Roman triumph, a military triumph, and he's going to write something about the triumph and hope that he will meet one of the very established Romans who would be there. There are generals, there are high up politicians, so on and so forth. But on his way to get there, he's going to meet other everyday Romans and have interactions with them and help them with problems that they may have. One of the people that he encounters is the Centurion, who is incredibly hungry. He's been on duty and hasn't been able to get off to go get food. So he asks Titus to go get him some bread. And so Titus then goes to the shopkeeper, Antonia, to try to buy bread from her. And in the images there, you can see some of the dialogue that these characters are having with each other. So to talk a little bit more about the characters and the Centurion, this is probably one of the most well-known ancient Roman figures. A centurion would typically be in charge of 100 soldiers, but they also held pretty important political or administrative positions, especially as you get further and further into the Roman Republic and Empire. And when you look at images of the Centurion, they're often known for having a very unique helmet, which you can see on the left with that transverse crest. On the right is some of our early concept art for what we wish the Centurion to look like, and that's kind of what we'll move towards in later iterations of this game. For Antonia, we were looking at evidence, and it's interesting because a lot of the evidence that we have for female shopkeepers is a little bit later, but we do believe that there were shopkeepers who were women during the later 1st century BCE, which is when our story is set. If you take a look at that relief, the top one from Ostia there, Ostia is a port city near Rome, you can see a female shopkeeper who is selling her wares to various customers. And these shops would have been all over the Roman landscape and cityscape. You would not have been able to escape them. They would have been loud. They were always trying to attract customers. And you can even see the extents to which they would try to attract customers in that image, where on the right of it, you can see 2 monkeys. So just the exoticism that they would use to try to attract people to their store to buy their wares. And on the right, you can see some of our early art for what we envision Antonia to look like.
So I'm going to talk a little bit about what the gameplay looks like. So the story that Lissa developed, we were responsible for bringing to life, and we decided that we were going to use virtual reality early on. Now, there are some different navigation challenges that are associated with VR, so we opt for point and click. So you see, you start off here outside of this temple on the north end of the Roman Forum, and you click the icon and you teleport into this conversation with the hungry Centurion. After you introduce yourselves, he says he's pretty hungry. So after that, you click on the icon that teleports you over to Antonia's taberna or shop. She says, come on in, get your vases, bread, and grapes. And you see here that you're able to point and select which item that you would like to buy. After you select one of these items, you have this dialogue where Antonia says, that'll be 1 denarii, or $1. Titus says he's only got 5, and she says, deal. Who wouldn't, really? After you buy the bread or whatever item that you would like to purchase, you go back to the Centurion and you talk to him. And here you have 2 different options if you bring him the bread. If he smells the bread and notices that you have it in your hand, he asks if he may have it. And you have the option to say, sorry fam, I'm keeping this bread. And if you do that, he gets really angry. In the English, I believe we said, you're a cruel monster, but Lissa's translation, I believe she calls him ugly. If you answer the nice way and you say, here you go, friend, have this bread, he says, thank you, I will love this bread forever, which is a weird thing to say about bread, regardless of what century you're from, I think. So for some of the development, the tools that we used are Unity, and we were developing for the Oculus Rift initially, and now we're targeting the Oculus Quest, which allows us to be much more mobile. It's totally wireless and will hopefully be much more accessible. We also ended up using Yarn Spinner to handle all of our dialogue. That wasn't always the case, though. Originally, we created this really complex state machine that would handle all of our dialogue and actions. We started off with this because we knew that because the goal was to immerse players in an environment through conversation, that a really good dialogue system would be important. And we also needed to be able to handle all the various states for animations and audio cues and that sort of thing. Unfortunately, that system did not scale well, but we ended up using Yarn Spinner, which has worked really well. This has let us use text files, and because we're just editing simple text files, has made it really easy to collaborate with Lissa, who's been able to translate all of the different dialogue options that we've needed to make this game actually interactive. There were some challenges with Yarn Spinner, though. In VR, we really needed to use TextMesh Pro because of the way that there was some interesting camera culling happening in the virtual environment. So to do that, we had to write some custom extensions for Yarn Spinner. And some of these extensions included making animated text. And for that, we made a parser that would run through everything. And through custom tags, we were able to do different sorts of animations on the text. So when the Centurion is yelling at you, why have you betrayed me, Titus? The text is able to shake and really emphasize the anger in his voice. And we also created extensions that allowed us to control the audio and animation through Yarn Spinner as well. So if we wanted to, have a particular animation clip or audio clip play at a particular time, we just give it the parameters through Yarn Spinner. And Mohammed worked on a lot of these custom extensions that have made it really easy to scale. So as we move on to different stories and scenarios, we're going to really easily be able to implement these things. So for the user study that we conducted, we used students that were participating in Lissa's introductory Latin class. So for that study, we had 32 participants. 18 were in the experimental group and 14 were in the control group. They were chosen at random and divided into these 2 different scenarios. One would play the VR game in the Imaginarium, and the control group would just read a transcript of dialogue through an online quiz. We asked them both the same pre and post questionnaire questions that were doing things like defining the different Latin vocabulary words, parsing verbs, etc. And the results came back interesting. because we've only done 32 participants, it's really hard to say if there's any consistent, conclusive trend about whether VR is better at teaching than traditional. However, we've got some pretty good early results. For example, the word panis, which is the Latin word for bread, has shown a really strong correlation based on just this preliminary data that the VR experience has made it stick in their head a little bit better than just reading. And most importantly, people really like this experience. One student said that he will never forget panis, which I think really shows that this particular story that revolved around this particular object has had a really strong correlation. So some challenges with the study. There are, of course, technology and developmental challenges. There's lots of work that needs to be done to develop this, and a huge amount of effort needs to be paid for historical accuracy, especially if it's going to be used in an educational setting.
And great solutions always come with challenges. And one of the challenges that we recognize is the digital divide issue. Access to technology due to cost or the steep learning curve or support system or usability can impact these type of pace of adoption. This is actually not a new news. A number of similar XR modern technology solutions that are being developed right now are faced with similar issues, especially in the edtech technology sector. As the Department of Education once emphasized, the digital divide cannot truly be bridged until all students understand how to use the technology. This is a challenge that takes a collaborative approach to solve it. By tech industry and schools working together, and even within the school system by education technology department and the academic affairs department closely working together. There is a way, I believe, to bridge the adoption rate and the digital divide issue for our learners. We have always been working on finding a better solution for another important improvement point on our end, which is to develop ways to make the content more accessible to students with disabilities. We're excited about the collaborative opportunities with the industry and the academic leaders to solve this important issue together. With these important elements addressed, we strongly believe that this type of immersive learning experience can transform and improve the way our students learn language.
There are challenges that also come from the language sector. The fact that students may come into this experience having different levels of ability. Maybe some of them learned in high school or middle school. Maybe some of them are learning Latin for the first time in college. So that background can affect their experience with Lingua Vitae. And not only that, if they have come from learning Latin in the past at some point, they may have learned from a different textbook. So the concepts that they might be familiar with can vary. So when we are trying to gauge how much Latin and how much grammar to put into each scene, this is going to kind of help. This will be a challenge for us to figure out as we are creating future scenes, to make sure that we are allowing for some progression in the language. Last but not least, we want to talk about the fact that it's a culture. They're people and they lived an everyday existence. This isn't just language in a vacuum. So we want to make sure that we provide enough cultural context that students are learning about what it meant to be in ancient Rome and what it was to be an ancient Roman, not just the Latin that they might have happened to speak.
We believe that the experiences that our students have in their learning journey today shapes the world we will live in tomorrow. So it will be really nice to be able to include more participants to this type of study so that we can empower our learning community, our global learning community, to have enriching learning experience. We're also hoping to include other students in the classics sector, as well as also expanding the studies to other universities. Even though VR may initially seem like a challenging concept for a lot of universities, one of the pioneers in EdTech, Maya Jovina, she once mentioned that mixed reality will offer us a canvas to imagine a new modes of learning and new ways to collaborate with others beyond the frame of the screen. In other words, she sees Moore's law driving technology capabilities up and prices down, and eventually it will lead to improving the price range and fidelity and interactivity of the XR teaching experiences.
And I just want to give a little bit of a sense of where we're going with this in terms of our storyline and what scenes we anticipate doing. So we initially envisioned about 8 different scenes. Some of the future scenes will involve Titus, the poet, going and talking to various people, including sailors and soldiers who are near the triumph. He'll be helping a child who can't see the triumph and describing to her various things that he sees. There'll be a celebration where he'll end up meeting some potential clients, some patrons who can support him. And he'll have a meeting with one of them and go through their house and learn a little bit about domestic architecture there, or the students will learn about domestic architecture through that. There'll be a fancy banquet, and as well as poetry writing mini games. So in between each scene, we envision users going through this experience having the opportunity to write their own poems about what they've seen and experienced.
Thank you very much, everybody. And if you have any questions, please let us know. We'll be happy to answer them.
Thank you.
Thanks.
All right. Someone asked earlier in the talk, so you might have addressed this later. Does the game have voice acting? And if so, how did you think about Latin pronunciation?
The funny thing is that with Latin, I mean, we're not even entirely sure how people spoke it in the ancient world. We have some grammatical treatises that give us some sense. So most of our evidence is based off of a guy named Quintilian. So I did try to make it such that it sounded a little bit more like what we assume we would have heard back 2,000 years ago. But even then, we're still kind of taking some creative license, probably.
Question about VR. It's resource intensive. I assume they mean both for creating and for the requirements on the player's machine. Is it really worth it for this aspect?
So we're not sure about the language acquisition aspect. What we had shown before was just like reading the text. But compared to a different game, no, that wasn't part of our research considerations. As far as it being worth it, I think there's another component that we haven't quite studied yet, which is the cultural immersion part of it. So we're recreating the Roman Forum as it was around the, what is it listed, the 1st century?
Yeah, 1st century BCE.
And so that component, we feel like, does actually contribute a lot in terms of immersing people in that environment. So while there's still more studies to be done, that's kind of the direction that we're going with it in terms of making it a more immersive, more engaging space than just on a flat screen.
And I'd like to add a little bit to that. I mean, I think in the sense that with those quotes that we gave, the comments about people liking it and realizing that Latin can be an immersive and enjoyable living language. I mean, that's kind of our whole goal. And it's really hard to recreate that. So we've found so far, that VR seems to be a really good way to potentially do that. Because, we can't just send students to ancient Rome to study Latin. It just doesn't happen anymore. These kinds of opportunities, like study abroad and so on, are difficult for us. So I think that's part of why we're hoping that this will be successful. But as Brian said, we've got a lot of work to do in terms of building up the cultural content as well.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Yeah, thanks so much.